Okay, so this first video, it is around really understanding what those challenges are to user privacy and how they really impact this ad ecosystem. So I think the first question, I'll kick over to you, Phil. So how has user privacy changed in the last 2 years?
Yeah, no, look, it's a good question. I think really, if you look at it, it's changed twofold. So number one is regulatory, and number two is probably, I guess, what you would term industry changes. So if we look at, or we zoom in on regulatory, we have the GDPR in Europe, which came into effect in 2018. It's the I guess it's more comprehensive in its definition of what comprises personal data. It's particularly important to digital marketers who use identifiers such as cookies and apps, or app IDs, sorry, where these fall under, I guess, personal data within the GDPR. There's 6 lawful bases for people that don't know for processing personal data. So you have consent, you have legal obligation, vital interest, contract, public task, and legitimate interests. So that's it really from a regulatory point of view. Then you have, I guess, probably what you term industry changes, which is more focused on browser. So if you look at Safari and zoom in on that, they had ITP, which came out in 2018, which I guess the mantra around that was blocking third-party cookies. This was it was followed very quickly by Mozilla, who blocked all third-party cookies, or the tracking of third-party cookies, in 2019. And then Chrome came along in 2020 and actually said, we're going to start blocking third-party cookies, and we're going to do that in 2022. And this announcement has probably been more significant than the previous two, really, because if you look at Chrome's market share, it's circa 60% of the market today. So they are all key points with the changes around privacy. Just a side note as well, CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which came into effect in 2020. That's also a statewide privacy law that regulates how businesses all over the world are allowed to handle the personal information of Californian residents. So those have been the main changes over the last 2 years.
Cool. So we've got the regulatory side, and then we've also got the reaction from the browsers. Quite a difficult question for you, Wayne, but why do you think this has happened? Why do you think these regulations come in and the browsers have taken these specific actions?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is interpretation of regulation, but broadly, whether it's regulatory or browser controlled, it's to give the user more controls and freedom over how their data is used. So historically, some of the methods in which companies would collect data has significant, flaws. Data was being sent everywhere. The user couldn't kind of retract that. The user wasn't necessarily giving consent most of the time. So, I mean, holistically, it's just to make the digital experience of users much safer and much better. Once you drill into that, there's obviously regulatory frameworks for how data is used, and therefore there are interpretations of that framework. I think that's a challenge, just to work out where exactly do you land on kind of the spectrum of those different means of processing data. But that's why it's changed. And that's only a good thing for advertising, to make it a more controlled, sort of mature, for want of a better term, grown up industry that we operate in, and one in which we really do put the user's interests first and foremost.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we're slowly getting there as well. I think when regulation such as GDPR first came in, it was very much users still weren't really sure on how data is being processed, but I think it's getting a lot clearer and only getting more clearer going forward. So, a question for you, Phil. Obviously, these changes have happened. They've been quite significant to the whole ecosystem. But how has it impacted digital marketing specifically?
Yeah, I think you could probably look at it at a use case level, really, when you're talking about how it's going to impact, I guess, advertisers. So there's a number of things. The first one is probably targeting. So traditionally, advertisers have used an array of signals to target individuals or users, so demographic, intent, interests, etc., etc. I guess with the privacy changes and the regulatory changes and the browser changes, advertisers will have less signals to use, which in turn will render targeting less effective. Number two is frequency capping, which is the notion, obviously, of controlling the number of ads people see. So, and this is determined really by being able to identify those users across multiple websites across the open web. Without online IDs or limited IDs, advertisers risk, I guess, being inefficient from an advertising point of view with their spend, and then also overexposing them, which is a bit of an issue and a bit of a worry for many advertisers out there. The third is measurement, and this is quite a big one for a lot of advertisers, really, to be able to understand, I guess, the ROI of the advertising spend that they're putting out there. So this encompasses both analytics and attribution. Again, advertisers have relied on IDs to understand the performance of their advertising. I guess across the open web, it becomes a whole lot harder for advertisers to understand that measurement when these IDs become, I guess, more sparse in the industry as we move forward. And then the final is personalization. So this includes advertising personalization, and then also on-site personalization as well. Both of these rely on being able to understand, a given user and how they're interacting. Without the use of these IDs, this will lead to fewer known users, which in turn will have an impact on the impact of creative messaging, both whether that's being on site and then also whether that's through dynamic creative as well on the open web.
Yeah, so 4 big areas there. Quite significant challenges for any advertiser. Is there one that you think is more important than the others, or do you think it's 4 big significant challenges that marketers need to face collectively?
I mean, from my point of view, they're all fairly important. If I was looking at it on the face of it, probably the measurement piece is one of the bigger things that the brands are probably more concerned about it. But that's my point of view. But for me, all of them are very, very important. Yeah,
and I guess from a programmatic perspective, Wayne, obviously big use cases there where programmatic heavily relies on a user ID. What does it mean for programmatic if we can't do these things anymore?
Programmatic is just the means of buying and selling ads using data and tech. So programmatic is more conceptual than anything else. The way in which it's used will be different now. So the data in which you can use to target and fulfill those use cases Phil just spoke to will change. The tools and technologies that you need to use to enable the buying and selling of ads, they're going to have to modernize and change to adapt. So conceptually, programmatic is still the same, but just the way the data and tools that enable it just have to change, and that's fine. It's not going away. It's just it's an evolution. It's the way that transport evolved from horse and cart to airplane. You're doing these things. There was a means of moving, a means of getting somewhere, and this is a means of buying and selling ads. It's just evolving with the times, which is it's a good thing to be a part of, but clearly is a lot of uncertainty right now.
Makes sense. Okay, yeah, I think that was a really good roundup of just trying to understand what those issues are and their impact. Stay tuned for our next video where we actually try and really quantify the actual impact of these changes inside closed ecosystems such as Facebook and Google, and outside those closed ecosystems as well.